Brevard County Commissioner Curt Smith has one of the toughest Republican primary elections in August, with a challenge from the right from former Commissioner Trudy Infantini. The results of that election will be significant for the political balance on the commission. Welcome to I Am Brevard. I'm Isadora Rangel. I sat down with Commissioner Smith this week to talk about his re-election campaign, how to fix county roads, and some of his latest votes. Watch. Commissioner Smith, thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
So we have a lot to talk about, but I want to start with elections. We are just over a month away from the primary election on August 28th. And I think you have the most high-profile Republican primary in the county. You're running against former Commissioner Trudy Infantini. Now tell me, is this the most challenging primary that you've had since you were elected 4 years ago?
Well, I've only had one primary, and that was 4 years ago, and that was against 6 others. So, you know, the dynamics are different. Now I'm only concentrating on one person as opposed to 6 last time. But the drill is the same. You got to get out, meet the people, get your message out, and just keep pushing, putting one foot in front of the other every day.
And I talk to a lot of business leaders and just political watchers, and they see this race as just being crucial to sort of the political balance on the commission, because former Commissioner Infantini has positioned herself to the right. And what do you think are the political implications of this election, especially when it comes to what projects get approved and really what kind of policy we're seeing coming from the commission?
Well, I think that's a great question, because it's a very stark contrast between my opponent and myself. I've only been there 3.5 years, and I've got a litany of accomplishments. I've traveled to Washington, D.C. I've traveled to Colorado Springs for the Space Coast Symposium. I've been actively involved in bringing Blue Origin here, which will be bringing 300 jobs and $32 million a year in salaries. Embraer, I worked with that also, USSSA, which is going to yield hundreds of millions of dollars in sales tax revenue and tourist tax money. And so I think, as near as we can tell, since I've been in office, I've been directly responsible for about 2,300 to 2,500 jobs coming here. Overall, about 5,000. Northrop Grumman, for example, when I took office, they only had 2,000 employees. They now have over 5,000. In fact, just today at the Melbourne Chamber of Commerce, they announced that they're looking for 250 more hires at Northrop Grumman. So my opponent, on the other hand, she was there for 8 years, and you can ask her what her accomplishments were, but I'll tell you, they were zero. She didn't do anything. She voted against all 8 budgets. And she likes to champion herself as a conservative that wants to cut budgets. Well, most of those 8 budgets were at a time when the county was in a real downturn. If you remember 08 through 012, we had the recession. And so those budgets, they had drastic cuts. In fact, there's many positions that we still haven't refilled. They cut hundreds of employees. And so if any budget she should have voted for would have been some of those, because they were actually cutting deeply. She didn't vote for those. So she's a no person. I'm a yes person. I'm a businessman. Some people call me the Trump of Brevard County, because I know how to get things done, and my record proves it.
Your opponent says that she has said it at several forums and occasions that you voted to raise taxes. What is your response to that?
Well, my response is, how do I put this delicately?
Did you vote to raise taxes?
Yeah. No. As a matter of fact, the budget and the millage rate went down all 3 years. I voted for a lower millage rate, tax rate, each of the 3 years. In fact, here's a good little tidbit for you. The house that she lives in with her husband, that's homesteaded in West Melbourne, which happens not to be in District 2, her taxes went down all 3 years. So it's a bogus claim, and people can accept it for what it is.
And besides running against primary opponent. There is a commissioner on a commission serving with you, Commissioner Tabaya, who has made it clear that he wants you to lose your re-election. I think he's made no secret of that. And he has pushed several votes that have put you on the record with conservatives. One of them that I can think of is asking the commission to use money from tourism projects for sewage infrastructure instead. Does he keep you on your toes with these maneuvers, and what do you think about his strategy, if it's going to work or not?
Well, it doesn't change what I do. Like I said, I'm a doer. I get things done, and you know, I'm doing what's best for the county. And as far as sewer projects, I'm first in line to promote sewer projects. But you know, sewer projects, they're utility based, so it's not a county responsibility. For example, if somebody in West Melbourne is asked to pay more property taxes to fix a sewer in, say, Satellite Beach, well, that's not exactly fair for the person in West Melbourne, because they'll never use that sewer system. So that's why we have utilities. Of course he does what he does because he's doing everything he can to try and make me look bad. One just recent example, about 2 months ago, he brought up a proposal to put term limits on volunteers. I have 64 positions. Each commissioner has 64 volunteer positions where we have to man them. Well, it's very difficult to find 64 people in the county that want to volunteer and show up at meetings on a regular basis. And so as the person that's appointing them, I can unappoint them at any time I want. So a term limit on them is ridiculous from that standpoint. And from the other standpoint, they're not elected officials. They serve at their will. They're volunteering and they serve at my will. I can unvolunteer them and I can dismiss them. So, but what he did was, he got me on the record as saying that I'm against term limits for volunteers. So they just stretched it out. Now my opponent has listed on her little walking cards that I'm opposed to term limits. Very disingenuous. And I'm not against term limits. In fact, when I first took office, I explored the idea of term limits for the constitutional officers, and I had them all in my office and talked to them about it and asked them their opinions. And I backed off because, as they pointed out, they're not policymakers, they're administrators. So they really don't influence policy. So to say that I'm against term limits, but that's just one example of the kind of gotcha moments that he plays. So, you know, I think people see it for what it is. And
let's move on from politics to policy. What are the biggest issues for Brevard today that you think will play a big role in the primary?
I think, well, I know the Indian River Lagoon is high on everybody's list. I think jobs is high on everybody's list, and roads, infrastructure. And I championed those three things when I took office. You know, the lagoon's not a political issue for me. It's a personal issue. I live on the lagoon. I bought a house there back in 1988, so that's 30 years ago. I've got grandkids that play on the lagoon. I spend an awful lot of my spare time on the lagoon. When I first got elected, they were just establishing the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. And so I went to Robin Fisher, who was the chairman at the time, and said, I want to be appointed to that because I want to be part of that. Because one of the things I realized when before I ran and when I was running, we've had a zillion studies about this lagoon, but we haven't had any action. So I wanted to be there so that we could start the action. And so I was appointed, and a year later, well, actually, initially, I was voted to be the vice chair, and then the next year I became chairman of the Indian River Lagoon. So that's a cause that I champion. I own it, and again, my adversary on the commission, Mr. Tabaya, has done everything he can to try and make me look bad with the Lagoon people. But just to give you one idea of how the Lagoon people know who is their champion, they held a fundraiser for me in May, and in one night they raised $18,000 for me.
Who are these Lagoon people?
They were the Lagoon people, like people with MRC and the zoo and interested environmentalists and those folks. The folks that really, really, really live the lagoon every day. Mr. Tabaya, for example, when he came on the commission 2 years ago, I was chairman of the Indian River Lagoon Council. He's never been to one Indian River Lagoon Council meeting. He's never been to an MRC meeting,
Marine Resource Council.
He's never come to me and said, hey, listen, you're really active in the lagoon. What can I do to help?
And you're talking about the lagoon, and we previously talked about sewage. And sewage, because of the spill that happened after Hurricane Irma, is not just a sewage issue. All that sewage was dumped into the lagoon. So the question is, why not divert money from tourism projects? I believe there's about $14 million to help with the lagoon by fixing infrastructure and cleaning up the lagoon. You voted against doing that. Why did you vote against it?
When did I vote against doing
When
that?
to buy a proposed
Well,
moving
at the
the
time
money?
at the time he did, you couldn't do it. Again, another political game that he played. Yeah, people have to understand tourist taxes, and that's another game that my opponent plays. She says we're using
But let's
property
focus
taxes.
on the policy and not on.
But the policy is that the state legislature deems that the tourist tax can only be used for certain things. We call it the color of money in government. You know, it's very easy to take pot shots and say, geez, you should be putting all that money for whatever into the lagoon or into sewer projects. Well, the problem is you can't just, where do you get this money from? Tourist tax, for example, can only be spent on things that are related to tourists. We don't, the commission doesn't make that determination, the state legislature does. And the silliness of that can be pointed out. What's more tourist oriented than people being on the beaches and swimming in the ocean? But we can't use tourist tax money to pay for lifeguards. Now, doesn't that seem a little silly? But we as a commission, we have no control over that. Just like we have no control over putting tourist tax money into sewage. We can't. So it's a nice play on words, but we can't. Representative Fine worked on a bill and he changed that, but it's still, we as a commission, we can't go to the TDC and just raid their pot of gold and say, well, we can do better than you. We know better than you do how that money should be spent, and we should spend it on XYZ project. We can't do that. TDC has to come to us with a recommendation, and then we can either follow it or say no. That's the way it works. So I know the other thing that is commonly referred to is the fake grass in Vieira. Well, that was a project that I got involved in over a year ago, and I saw several benefits. One is, obviously, it's going to benefit the kids and the families because their kids are going to be playing on better fields, and these are professional quality fields. The other advantage is that USSSA can use those fields too. Our people will still have first dibs on when they're going to play their game, but they don't play all day long. They'll play from like 6 to 8. So USSSA, they can utilize those fields before and after. And by doing that, they can bring in millions more tourist tax dollars. And again, I want to remind people that tourist tax dollars are not property taxes. Unless you spend the night in a motel or hotel in Brevard County.
Those are known as hotel bed taxes.
Right.
And going back to the law that the legislature passed, which was proposed by Brevard County Representative Randy Fine,
right.
It basically expands the uses of the tourism development tax. Now you can use it for infrastructure as well as lagoon restoration.
Right.
Going forward, should the TDC revisit how it allocates that money to, let's say, use it for infrastructure, given it is a need that we have, that we need to address it, we wish we could do more.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question
projects.
because that's another thing that I'm doing. You know, I said I'm a doer, I'm a doer. So when that passed, I went directly to the TDC and I said, okay guys, I need some money for the lagoon. What can we do? So I've worked with them and we're going to announce shortly that they're going to contribute $1 million a year to lagoon projects. So again, I'm doing things. That's what I do. I get things done.
Is that enough?
Boy, is it ever enough? You know, when is enough enough? You know, how much money do you spend on anything? We've got roads that need to be, our roads are terrible. Anybody that drives on roads know that. We have, depending on who you talk to, between $100 and $300 million backlog on roads. So, you know, you got to balance what you're spending money on.
And I want to get to roads in a minute, but I want to ask about something that's happening on July 24th. The Commission will vote on whether to allow a ballot measure to levy up to 1/3 of a mil to fund the Children's Services Council, which helps at-risk children and parents. They do programs such as postnatal care and more. What is going to be your vote? Are you going to allow that to be on the measure, on the ballot for November?
I've gotten an awful lot of pressure from an awful lot of friends of mine, but I can't vote for that because from my point of view, property tax money needs to benefit everyone, and I give a lot of money to charity, but I can't tell you or any other taxpayer that that I should be deciding on how your taxes should be spent with regard to charities. I think it's a wonderful program. I looked into it extensively. I like the project, but I can't support the property tax part of it. It just doesn't work for me.
I think, should you leave it to voters to decide, perhaps, regardless of how you personally feel about it?
Well, and that's a good point, but this isn't a good time of year to do that, because we've got so many ballot initiatives on the ballot this November. We've got, I don't know, 7 or 9 constitutionals, and there's some other money issues, and quite frankly, I don't think it has a chance to pass. And that's what I've told the people that have been talking to me. You'd be much better off waiting a year and doing it then. You'd have a better audience. That's my opinion, but I think that that's a correct opinion.
And there's another ballot initiative that I want to hear your thoughts about, which raises the Homestead Exemption by $25,000. Local governments around Florida are panicking about it, because I think Brevard County will lose maybe, believe $8 million a year. I'm not sure on the figure. Yeah. Are you going to vote yes or no on that? And how should voters vote on it?
Well, I'll tell you, from the standpoint of the county, the voters should vote against it. But as with the Lagoon tax, when I was out advocating for the Lagoon and people to vote, I told people, listen, I'm not advocating for the Lagoon tax. I'm not advocating against it. What I want to do is I want to educate you so you can make a educated decision on whether you want to support the tax or not. And I'm going to do the same thing with this. People need to know that only about 43%, I believe that's the number, 48% of the people, that's what it is. 48% of homes in Brevard County are homesteaded, and only 23% of those will benefit from this. So, or 22% it is the right number. So that means 78% of the people in this county are going to subsidize 22%. So people need to understand that. That's one. Number two, they need to understand that if we have a $12 million shortfall, that's going to be disastrous for this county, because we don't have $12 million that we can just lop off. So you're going to see drastic cuts in services. So that would mean libraries and parks and recreation and roads, and it just goes on and on and on. We just don't have it. So it would be disastrous for not only this county, for every county in the
Seems
state.
Like you're against it. Are you voting no?
Oh, absolutely. I would not, no. I am not going to vote for that thing.
Okay.
And privately, if you ask me, like, this isn't private, but no, I won't vote for it, and I would encourage anybody else not to vote for it. But when I'm dealing with the public, I'm just telling them, like, I've had some HOA meetings, and they've asked, this question has come up, and I tell them that I personally am not going to vote for it, but it's your choice, and here's the deal. And like I tell them, 78% of the people are going to subsidize the 22% of the people that will benefit. And I will be one of those 22% of the people that will benefit from an extra $25,000 homestead.
And those are more higher income homeowners.
Well, yes, higher valued homes.
So let's move on to another vote that the commission recently took, which approved a resolution that asks Florida Attorney General Penn Bondi to join a lawsuit challenging DACA, that's the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, which allows kids who were brought to the country illegally by their parents to remain here. There's a lot going on in Congress, but why did you vote for this when it's not really a county policy issue?
Well, and you're absolutely right, and that's my thought. But it's easier to just vote for it because, as you said, it means nothing.
So do you believe that DACA should end? How do you feel?
I would leave that in the hands of my legislators in Washington and President Trump. It's their issue, not mine. As you pointed out, I don't have a dog in the hunt. I can't influence it one way or the other.
So why vote for it then?
Why not vote for it?
Yeah.
Why vote against it? It means nothing. That's what I'm telling you. It means nothing.
And why does the county keep voting on these things? And this was
Good
pushed
question.
by John Tabaya.
Right.
It seems like he's trying to get you on the record again.
Gee, you think?
In your primary. And did you vote yes on this because you have
Well, he had one of his little
Republican
minions
primary?
there in the front row taking a video just so they could see me vote against it.
But did your election play any role in you voting yes on this?
Didn't play a role either way because, like I said, it has no. I have no influence on it. So, you know, if Mr. Barfield or Ms. Isnardi wanted to bring something up, if it's near and dear to them, I'll vote for it because, again, it doesn't mean anything.
So, and let's move on to roads, which is, every time I have a commissioner here, I ask them about this because I think this is the issue that affects everyone in the county and it's so visible. I'm not asking you to give me numbers, but where are we in terms of recovering roads and making sure that roads don't become too bad for use? I mean, we had a backlog and there was millions of dollars last time I checked.
Hundreds of millions.
Yeah, and I'll start with this question then. How do you pay for this? Because there was a study done a couple of years ago that showed the options could be a new sales tax, a new gas tax. Would you ever support any of these taxes if it ever came before the commission?
Well, you can never say never. You know, my opponent says I never said something 4 years ago. I'm a businessman. You can never say never. You have to be flexible. You have to be able to change according to what's happening. What happens if the economy changes? What happens if the economy gets better or if it gets worse? So you have to be prepared. So anybody that says never, in my estimation, they don't know what they're talking about. When I took office, it was one of my big issues. I spent a lot of time with John Denninghoff, who was at the time the director of roads and bridges and public works, and got a real lowdown on what the roads were like, and they were very, very bad. There had been a study done by the Blue Ribbon Committee, I guess, a year or two before I took office, and they highly recommended a gas tax. Well, in a lot of levels, a gas tax makes sense because if you're talking, say, 6 cents a gallon, if the average person drives 12,000 miles a year and the average car gets 20 miles to the gallon, that means that person uses 600 gallons of gas a year. So 6 cents is 36 bucks. It's not a big deal. And I had the opportunity, I was the swing vote to either have raised the gas tax or not raise it. And I voted no, and that was when I first took office. Because I wanted to know if I could find some money in the budget that we could start paving more roads. And in fact, when I became chairman, I had sat down with Stockton Witten, who was the county manager at the time, and I said, Stockton, you got to help me find some money for roads. You know where every nickel and dime is. So there's got to be some money for roads there. So we got to work on it, and we refinanced some bonds, and we lowered our payments, we lowered our cost, and we have enough excess that during my term in office, we paved 58 miles of roads, up from 8 miles the year before, without an increase of anybody's taxes. And as the economy continues to grow, we're going to continue to get more money in. So the decision to vote against the gas sales tax, I think, was the right decision.
So can we clear that backlog without a new tax?
I'm hoping that we can, yeah.
And how long is that going to take?
Well, it depends on the economy, of course, because, you know, there's, like Jesus said, tomorrow's not guaranteed to anybody. So we don't know if we're going to continue this uprise in economic growth or not. But until we don't have it anymore, I think that we should go the route we're going and let the general taxes pay for it.
And I want to talk about, believe probably one of the most recent votes, which was to end this dispute with Port Canaveral of over 2 years over land over at Jetty Park. You voted to sell the land to the port for $860,000. There is criticism that the county did not get a fair market price for it. Why was that a good deal for the county and taxpayers?
Well, first of all, whenever you do anything in politics, there's going to be people to criticize.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I had to get used to because, you know, the people that hate you this week love you next week, and the people that love you this week skewer you next week. So there's always criticism for everything. Did we get a fair price? Well, it was discussed for a couple of years that I've been in office that we don't want to have anything to do with the port anymore with that piece of property because the lease was up. So what are we going to do with it? Well, we paid $862,000 for it 20-some years ago, yeah. And we thought a fair deal would be if we went to the port and we said, why don't you buy this back from us? And we're not going to make a dime on it. We just want what we paid, which obviously is not a great deal for us because it's worth more money. But there's a lot of litigation that would have been involved because there's no access road to that piece of property. And so weighing the options of all the litigation, of course, they would have had to get involved in the litigation, and who wins when the lawyers get involved? So I just thought from the standpoint that we're all one county, we're two different governing boards. They do what they do, we do what we do. I thought it would be best to just go forward and let's just get our money back for the citizens. This is the $862,000 we spent. Now we can spend that $862,000 on beach projects and the like. So we approached the Port Commission 2 years ago, and it wasn't well received because they thought that we should just give it to them. Well, I wasn't going to go for that. So that got to be a little bit contentious, but as I told the commissioners that I know, the port commissioners, listen, you know, we all have to live with each other. We all have to live in this county. This is our county. This is a fair deal for everybody. So finally, that's the deal that we agreed on. In fact, ironically, Commissioner Tobias is the one that made the motion to accept the $862,000 in May, and he's the one that tried to throw a monkey wrench in it yesterday or Tuesday at the meeting by holding out for free parking or something. And I said at the time, you know, that's like if you and I agree on, I'm going to buy your house, and we've agreed on the price. And at the settlement table, I say, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm not going to buy your house unless you throw in the lawnmower. Well, you know, the lawnmowers, you know, a riding lawnmower costs whatever. It's not a big deal. But it's just how would you feel? The principle is that, wait a minute, we had a deal, and now you're throwing up a roadblock at the end. I don't like that. I think it's dishonest.
And we have we have less than a minute left,
well,
but we already talked about your accomplishments. What are some of the things that you wish you had done in the last 4 years and that you feel like you have yet to accomplish on the commission?
I need to bring in more jobs. I've brought in, like I said, I don't know if I did say it, but rough estimate is somewhere between 2,500 and 5,000 jobs that have been accumulated since I've been here. And I've been directly responsible for a lot of those, and I'm not going to take credit for all 2,500 to 5,000, but it's the business climate that I create by being a businessman. And people know when I tell them that we can do this and you can trust me to do it, they know that they can trust me. Right. So I think there's nothing that I would have done differently. I just plan on keep doing the same thing I'm doing.
Commissioner, I wish we had more time, but
yeah,
our time is up now. But
well, let's do it again sometime.
We will.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great seeing you.
That's it for our show. My thanks to Commissioner Smith. You can watch us again right here next week on WEFS, and you can rewatch this episode of Florida Today's YouTube channel. And if you have questions or comments, email me at irangel@floridatoday.com. Thank you.